My name is Helen Maher. I'm the VP for EDI here at the University of Galway. And I just want to start by welcoming everybody here this morning. And as is our custom, os Gaeilge, a dine úsle, cuireann sé an áthas orm, a bheith an seo le viniu, ag an tionol, lucht siúl na héireann agus an stád, an trid ar son na curumíocht, tá fáilte roimh go léir. So good morning to our guests and to our colleagues, those from near and afar. You're all very welcome to this extremely important conference on Irish travellers, Mincéirs and the state, 1922 to 2022, the struggle for equality at the University of Galway. I have to say at the outset that I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak at the opening of such a significant event in the Decade of Centenaries programme. And I'm also happy to see so many in attendance here this morning at the opening of the conference. This is a really significant event. I was just discussing with people on the way in. I don't recall an event that has really looked at the 100 years since the foundation of the Irish state, of the position of Irish travellers in the Irish state, that has taken 2 days to look so deeply at the issues that the traveller community have faced over the last 100 years. So I think it's really significant in that regard, taking that time, taking this concentrated focus in providing a platform for engaging members of the traveller community, for allies, for representatives of higher education and civil society organisations in Ireland and internationally. And I would also very much like to acknowledge the events of the last few days with the hosting on campus of the 6th meeting of the Council of Europe Committee of Experts on Roma and Traveller Issues. And indeed, several of the speakers today were also integrally involved in that event. And I would like to also thank the conference organisers and by doing so state that this conference is a seminal moment in the recognition of the place of Irish travellers in the history of the Irish state since its foundation in 1922. It situates the historical position of travellers in the international context also, and it is unique in terms of the topics that are being addressed over the next couple of days. It's an occasion for dialogue, for sharing knowledge, expertise, experience, and for stories, which are so important in shaping the narratives of our past and our future. But also specifically, it's an important opportunity to document and learn from the struggle for equality that has been waged by traveller activists and traveller allies for many decades. It is a struggle that can inspire us to think bigger and to do more to address inequalities throughout all levels of our societies. Earlier this year, I spoke at one of my first events in this role, which I started in January at International Women's Day. And I referred at that event to one of what I think is the most inspirational feminist quotes, which is the statement by Kate Millett that says, "The personal is political." For me, that quote has been what has guided me throughout all of my years of working in the community sector and in higher education in terms of addressing issues of inequality. The quote provides a framework of analysis in which we can situate our lived experiences, and it is equally appropriate when we consider the everyday experiences of Irish travellers in the context of state policies throughout the 20th century. In this regard, the policy framework has been underpinned by systemic discrimination and a fundamental lack of recognition and respect for travellers as an Irish minority ethnic community. To counter this, Irish traveller activists have made sure that the personal is most definitely political through a sustained campaign for recognition of traveller ethnicity, for access to services such as health, education, and appropriate accommodation. So a key emphasis within this conference is to consider the richness of traveller heritage and culture and the creative and at times radical approaches to waging that struggle for equality. And in thinking about this conference, I was also brought back to a community-based documentary production that an organisation that I worked for in the inner city of Dublin funded back in 2001 on race and racism in Ireland. And I was very privileged to work on the editing of that, and some members in the audience were interviewed as both the Irish Traveller Movement and Pavy Point participated in the production of this documentary. And the inclusion of traveller perspectives in a documentary on race and racism in Ireland 20 years ago, I think, created a space to highlight that the experiences of discrimination that travellers faced was equating to racism. And I wanted to quote something from that documentary because it always stayed with me, and it was a reference that was made by Catherine Joyce, who many of you will know as a traveller activist, and she stated in the documentary that racism is not just an issue for Irish travellers. Racism is not just an issue for refugees and asylum seekers. Racism is not just an issue for black people. Racism is an issue for the whole of Irish society. I never forgot that quote because it actually put the emphasis and the onus back onto the wider society to acknowledge our part in shaping the racist experiences that so many members of the traveller community and other minority ethnic communities in Ireland had experienced. And the perspective, I suppose, forces us to consider that we can be complacent or complicit with racial discrimination, that we are either part of the problem or part of the solution in advancing traveller equality. And this brings me to my final point, which relates to praxis and that combination of how we analyse our experiences and the action that we take, so the combination of theory and practice. And a Brazilian educator who may be known to many of you, Paulo Freire, who's a radical education theorist, said, "Praxis is about reflection and action upon the world in order to transform it." And I think, pausing to think about that, reflecting on our experiences, but that reflection gives us knowledge. Knowledge is power to change the things that we experience on a daily basis. And I think what we can learn from these next few days is through the experiences of traveller empowerment, political activism, and taking that power into your own hands, that there's a lot to learn for us who are still waging struggles against equalities in tandem with our traveller representatives that are here today. So at this point, I would also like to acknowledge that apart from the national traveller organisations that have waged this struggle, it is good to see the representative of so many other traveller organisations who are working in small communities all over the island of Ireland to address traveller equality. And in that context, at this point, I would now like to hand over to Mags Casey, who is a traveller rights activist, a feminist, a mental health advocate, and a very passionate spokesperson for human rights. She is the project manager at Tipperary Rural Traveller Project. So you're very welcome, Mags.
I want to welcome everyone here today, and I want to thank the organisers of this event for me having the opportunity to speak. We have over the next 2 days the opportunity to share knowledge and insights to deepen our understanding of what this means. The relationship between Mincéir and the state. How is the oppressed relationship being maintained? What does it mean for our lives as travellers? Why are so many of our young people locked up in prisons? Why are we now living in worse conditions than ever? Why are we taking our own lives, either tragically or without warning, through suicide, or even on a slower pace through addiction? How does so much of Irish society collaborate in our oppression, or at its best, look the other way? The contributors to this conference are addressing a range of issues associated with the oppressed relationship. And we have this opportunity over the next 2 days to look at accommodation, education, employment, mental health, discrimination, history, colonialism. Together with its visual presentations and exhibitions, we have the chance to discuss the results of evidence-based research and expert analysis across these social, economical life. I think there's a key question to be asked about the relationship that exists between the evidence-based research, the expert's opinion, and the process of change. Mincéir and the state, the struggle for equality. If we all know about the first part, how do we address the second part? May I become too cynical in my old age, or maybe I didn't spend long enough in school, but I'm not able to fully see the connection here. It's hard for me to think of an example where research alone or expert analysis alone has ever resulted in change. I think we might be one of the most researched communities in the world. We definitely are in Ireland. And if we believe that sharing the story, proving that the oppression or showing the misery that we have as a community have suffered to this date, that some magic effect on Irish society or Irish politics, there's been no evidence to back this up. I personally find it very, very challenging to talk to my people about another settlement that helped them to understand about more research. When I'm asked the question, Max Casey, what are you asking me now? What's this going to do for us? Is this going to bring about change? Because we're constantly being researched. We don't want more people asking us questions. You told to settle people enough about us, now we want a better life. That's how my people feel on a daily level. And when they're bringing their people to the graveside to bury them, they say that they have enough. So my appeal here to you here really is about making the best opportunity we have over the coming 2 days. I'm asking each and every contributor, including myself, to look at the implications for change of research and finding the insights they provide. Please do not ignore the second part of the conference title. If we have gained this much knowledge about the causes and the nature of oppression, what does it mean for the struggle for equality? Where might there be a starting point? Even be for this struggle, it's not an easy question to answer. But I think if we make full use of this wealth of experience, expertise, and knowledge that we actually have in this room, we can possibly create a landmark beginning, a long overdue process of change for my community. 2 people in particular have inspired me throughout my life. One was Paulo Ferreira, and he said, to alienate people from their own decision making is to change them into objects. And I'm very privileged to know the next person on a personal level, and this is Bernadette Devlin. She said, we were born into an unjust system and we're not prepared to grow old in it. As many of the travelers here in the room know, I will only speak the truth, and they know themselves that our people have enough. We've come to a long oversight of maybe 50 years now at this stage. I've only been involved 30 years. You know, we're constantly aware of our oppression. We're struggling every day. But what we need now is about real political change, to bring about real change for our community. And I think the starting point is we know what we're struggling with in terms of internalized oppression. But it's now just time for action, and that this time that we can actually bring about real change. We can't do it on our own as a community. We can lead the way, but we need the people like yourselves who are experts and have the analysis and the research done on us. And as I said, we're one of the most researched groups probably in the world. And I definitely will tell you that my community have enough of being researched. Now we're at this particular point that we actually need real change. And I'm delighted with the heading of the conference because, Mincéir and the state and the struggle for equality, at this point, we're all very conscious of how the state manipulated us into assimilation. But I think we accept that with very, 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 very good intentions. We went along trying to bring about political change, and we realize now, that how you can become an instigator, in your own, without being aware of it, that actually what they were trying to do is trying to fix us, make us like settled people. We're not settled people. We're the indigenous people of this country. We're proud and dignified of that. We want to hold on to that, but it's costing us lives. We have to bring young children, as young as 11 years of age, to bury them. A lot of my community, young people, older people, unfortunately have only 3 choices. And them choices, and the statistics, I'm not saying it personally, the statistics says it for itself, that they've only 3 choices. And them 3 choices is the courtyard, the prison yard, or the graveyard. So I hope with the next 2 days that we will actually look about bringing about real change and take the time to look what that looks like. I want to thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mags, and interesting that we both hit on Paulo Freire as well, as who also inspires, I think, how I see the world. But moving on from that, I suppose, to take specifically your very strong emphasis on action, which of course is also a Freirean way of looking at things, that once you have that knowledge, we are obliged to act, we're obliged to make changes. And that emphasis that you placed on the second part of the conference title and the necessity of changing into the future, that we can look back over the last 100 years, but what have we learned that can shape a new future for Irish travellers? So thanks for that really insightful input that you gave at the start of the conference. I would at this point also like to welcome and introduce Hallvard Gorseth, who is head of Anti-Discrimination Department and Roma and Travellers team at the Council of Europe.
So dear Max Casey, dear Helen Maher, dear participants, I'm of course honored to be part of the opening of this conference today. I'd like to thank the University of Galway and the Irish authorities for hosting the 6th meeting of the Council of Europe's Committee of Government Experts on Roma and traveller issues here in Galway over the past 2 days leading up to this conference. And as part of the actions of the Irish presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe to foster a Europe of welcome, inclusion and diversity. For more than 40 years, it has been a priority for the Council of Europe to fight anti-Gypsyism and discrimination, to protect the rights of Roma and travellers, and to promote equal opportunities and social inclusion. At the Council of Europe, the term Roma and travellers is used to encompass the wide diversity of the groups covered by our work in this field. On the one hand, Roma, Sinti, Manouche, Kale, Romanicals, Boyash, Rudari, persons who identify themselves as gypsies, Balkan Egyptians and Ashkali, Dom, Lom and Abdal. And on the other hand, groups such as travellers, Yenish, and the French gens du voyage. What all these groups have in common is the denial of individual rights, their history of oppression, and the stigmatization and deep prejudice they are faced with. All of this is determined by lack of acceptance of or even hatred towards an ethnicity or a lifestyle. What travelers and Roma have in common is their struggle for equality. In spite of years of efforts to ensure equality of travelers and Roma, evidence is continuously pointing at the persistent anti-Gypsyism they are faced with. As the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI, has defined it, anti-Gypsyism is a specific form of racism, an ideology founded on racial superiority, a form of dehumanization and institutional racism nurtured by historical discrimination, which is expressed, among others, by violence, hate speech, exploitation, stigmatization, and the most blatant kind of discrimination we know in Europe today. Fighting anti-Gypsyism and denial of rights is not always a matter that countries can solve on their own. The challenges that travelers and Roma are facing are complex. A multilateral approach is needed where countries can learn from each other's experiences and find common solutions to common challenges. When entire groups are having their rights systematically infringed, collective responses must also be articulated by the groups themselves. Roma and traveler communities need to build adequate responses through collective action and empowerment to claim their rights. Member states and the Roma and traveler communities can benefit from cooperation with and within the Council of Europe. We have an important body of standards which are relevant for the rights of travelers and Roma, and from the organization position as the guardian of human rights in Europe. The rich case law of the European Court of Human Rights and the highly relevant monitoring findings of ECRI, the Advisory Committee for the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, and the Committee of Experts for the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages form the basis for the Council of Europe's work on traveler and Roma equality and inclusion. The Council of Europe supports governments in designing and implementing laws, policies, and programs that reflect and promote human rights standards to the benefit of travelers and Roma. Our strategic action plan for Roma and traveler inclusion until 2025 specifically aims to combat anti-Gypsyism and discrimination and support real and effective equality, including through recognition of culture and arts and their promotion. The second aim of the action plan is to support democratic participation and promote public trust and accountability. And thirdly, to support access to inclusive quality education and training. Fighting intersexual discrimination, including of Roma and traveler women and LGBTI persons, is an essential cross-cutting issue throughout the work of the Council of Europe in this field. We implement, of course, this action plan through the work of the Committee of Government Experts on Roma and Traveller Issues, which during these past 2 days has been able to progress on the elaboration of standards on ensuring equality of traveller and Roma women and girls, on fighting segregation of traveller and Roma children in schools through inclusive education policies, and several other deliverables to be prepared over the next years. Council of Europe also provides extensive technical assistance to help individual member states implement our standards and common European policies, and to respond to the gaps identified by the European Court of Human Rights and our monitoring bodies, mainly through joint programs with the European Union. The work of the Council of Europe is also based on regular dialogue with traveller and Roma civil society. This consultation mechanism, in the form of a biannual dialogue meetings, aims at ensuring input to the various organs and entities of the Council of Europe on the effectiveness and appropriateness of their operational programs, of their monitoring mechanisms and political initiatives, and at contributing in this way to the empowerment of traveller and Roma civil society. We are currently carrying out a midterm review of our actions on traveller and Roma equality, with a final evaluation planned for 2025. Surely we will find things to improve and strengthen, and we do not expect to make rapid and spectacular progress in these few years, but the dedication of the Council of Europe to equality and inclusion of Europe's biggest minority is inherent in the mandate of our organization and will continue. So, with this brief overview of the work of the Council of Europe on traveller and Roma inclusion, I hope to have contributed to the discussions at this conference on the situation of travellers in Ireland, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion over the next 2 days.